beautiful native widow begged shelter for one night, but rancher gave her lifetime of care. The snow carried a silence so deep it swallowed hoofbeats, voices, even prayers. Out on the long plain where fence posts bowed under frost, and the sky fell heavy in its pale weight, a lone figure pressed forward, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. She had walked for hours with nothing but the sound of her own breath and the groan of leather at her waist, her steps slow, as if each one carried the memory of a man buried in the ground. She had seen winters before, but not like this one. This winter carried the edge of hunger, of exile, of grief that followed her shadow. Her name had once been spoken with tenderness, sung like a soft refrain by the husband who lay now beneath the earth. He had been taken from her in a hunting accident when the rivers froze last season. The world had not stopped for her mourning. Neighbors turned faces away. The little kin that remained were scattered by hunger, and when she asked for a corner of a cabin or a place by a stove, a settler's wife had shut the door, whispering about her blood. So she walked, wrapped in the thin blanket he once wore on the trail, following nothing but the faint glow of a lantern across the white. The light came from a ranch that stood alone, built of pine and stone, its chimney dragging smoke into the storm. She reached the door with hands stiff and raw, her body shaking from the cold. For a moment she only stood there, her breath clouding, listening to the hiss of snow against wood. Then she lifted her hand and knocked, soft at first, then with what little strength she had left. The door opened to a man whose silence was deeper than the storm itself. He stood broad in the frame, shoulders worn by years of labor, face weathered and unreadable. A wool coat hung from him, damp at the sleeves, and his eyes, gray as the sky behind him, searched her without haste. For a heartbeat he did not move. She thought he might close the door as others had done, leaving her to the white. But he stepped aside. The warmth of fire reached her before his voice did. She entered slowly, leaving snow at her feet, the smell of frost still clinging to her clothes. Inside, the room was plain but steady, wood walls lined with tools, shelves of tin cans, a long table scarred from years of meals eaten alone. A fire burned low in the hearth. She swayed toward it, not daring to ask for more. "You want food," he said, his voice low, more gravel than sound. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He ladled broth from a pot into a tin bowl, set it before her with a piece of bread rough as stone, but warm. She ate slowly, not from lack of hunger, but because dignity still lived in her. He did not sit across from her. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone used to the company of no one. When she finished, she set the bowl down gently, folded her hands in her lap. "One night," she whispered, her words fragile, accented from her mother's tongue, but clear enough. "Only one night. Then I'll go." He studied her, then turned his gaze back to the fire. "Storm says otherwise." The storm did indeed howl harder at the window, snow slapping the glass, the world beyond erased. She thought of lying out there, of being covered by the drift before dawn, and she bowed her head. He went to fetch more wood, stacking it near the fire with precise hands. When he returned, he pulled a blanket from the back of a chair and set it beside her. "You'll sleep here," he said. The night stretched long. She lay by the fire, listening to the crackle of wood, the low sigh of the wind through the eaves. Across the room, he moved little, only now and then stoking the fire, his presence as steady as the stone chimney itself. She thought of her husband, of the warmth of his chest, the weight of his laughter. Tears came but froze before they fell, caught in her throat. She let them rest there, unshed, and closed her eyes. By morning, the storm had not broken. The world outside was buried deeper, fences lost, trails gone. She woke to the smell of coffee, the scrape of a chair. He was already dressed for chores, pulling boots that looked worn enough to tell his whole history. She rose slowly, hands clumsy with stiffness. She murmured her thanks, expecting to be asked to leave once the weather eased, but he only gestured toward the stove, where a small skillet hissed. "Eat first," he said, and so began days that stretched longer than she intended. Each morning she told herself she would leave. Each evening the storm reminded her otherwise. She began to find small ways to repay the shelter she had asked for. She mended a tear in his shirt with thread she carried in a small pouch, her fingers deft though calloused. She swept the hearth when the ashes grew thick. When he brought in firewood, she stacked it, aligning the logs as her husband once taught her. He did not thank her, but she noticed his eyes soften, the lines at their corners less sharp. Her story came not all at once, but in fragments spoken at the edge of night. She told him of the hunting accident that took her husband, of the burial done in frozen ground, of neighbors who said her presence brought misfortune. She spoke of walking miles to a settler's house, asking for shelter, only to hear the door close with the words, "Not for your kind." The rancher listened. He asked no questions. His silence was not empty, but a kind of listening the world rarely gave her. She found herself speaking more than she expected, her voice shaking, less each time. Once she asked about him. He paused before answering. "This land was my father's," he said simply. "I kept it when he passed. Don't know what else to do, but tend it." "Alone?" she asked. He nodded. That was all. Outside, neighbors began to notice her presence. The nearest was an older widow, Mrs. Carter, who stopped by once with jars of preserves. She glanced at the stranger by the fire, her smile polite but thin, and afterward her visits grew fewer. At the store in town, when she ventured there once with the rancher, the keeper's eyes narrowed. He muttered under his breath, not caring if she heard. The words cut sharp, reminding her that even in the heart of winter, cruelty found its way through cracks. But in the house, the storm made a cocoon around them. She felt, for the first time in months, that she could breathe without fearing the cold inside men's hearts. Evenings grew gentler. Sometimes he told small stories about the river thawing in spring, about a horse he once lost in a flash flood. His voice was slow, as if words came reluctantly but honestly. She listened, offering nothing but the comfort of being near. One night, when the fire burned higher, she sang a lullaby in her mother's tongue, a song that had been sung to her as a child. Her voice was soft, uneven, but it carried warmth the room had not known before. He listened in stillness, his eyes fixed on the flame, and when the song ended, he only nodded, as if holding something too sacred to speak on. The days lengthened into a rhythm. Snow outside, quiet labor inside. She began to wonder if she was overstaying, if kindness had turned into burden. Yet each time she gathered courage to say she would leave, his actions contradicted the need. He placed an extra log on the fire when she sat too still. He left a pair of boots near her chair, ones he had repaired himself. He returned one evening with herbs from town, saying little, but she knew they were for her tea. It was not love, not yet. It was something gentler, a seed resting beneath snow waiting. The first time she smiled again, truly smiled, was when he spilled coffee across the table by mistake, muttering under his breath. She laughed softly, a sound she had not heard from herself in too long. He looked at her then, really looked, and though he did not laugh, the corners of his mouth twitched in something near it. By the third week, the storm began to ease. Paths appeared where snow had been too deep, fences showed their tops again. She stood by the window one morning, shawl wrapped tight, staring out at the horizon. She could leave now if she wished. She could walk on, chase the echo of a home that no longer existed. He came to stand beside her, not too close, but enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Storm's breaking." She nodded, her throat tightening. She wanted to say thank you, to gather her few things and step away with dignity. But her heart pulled in two directions, between leaving and the strange peace she had found here. That night, she did not sleep at once. She watched the fire burn low, felt the weight of choice pressing on her chest. He slept in his chair, boots still on, head bowed. She thought of all the doors closed in her face, all the voices that told her she was unworthy. Here, she had not been asked to prove anything. Here, she was simply given space to breathe. When morning came, she did not move toward the door. She moved toward the hearth, stoking the fire as if it were hers to tend. The storm had given her one night of shelter. Yet as snow melted slow on the eaves, she knew in her heart she was still there for reasons far deeper than weather. The storm passed, but the world it left behind was not gentler. Snow gave way to mud, and mud to whispers. What had been a house sealed and quiet became a place watched from the road, from the store, from the corners of narrowed eyes. She felt it when she walked into town with him, her shawl drawn tight, her face lowered. She felt the weight of stares on her back, as if every gaze were a stone. Yet he walked with the same steady gait, head held calm, boots sinking in thawing ground as though nothing around them could sway his balance. The storekeeper made it plain. He slid supplies across the counter, as if handling filth. His lips curved in words not spoken aloud but etched in the lines of his face. She kept her hands folded, the coins she carried trembling in her palm, until the rancher reached over, paid himself, and walked her out without a word. That silence was heavier than any insult. It was a shield. At night she told herself she would leave soon. The storm had been her reason to stay, but the storm was gone. Yet when morning broke, she found herself pulling water from the well, her breath curling in the crisp air, her hands working alongside his. It was not duty that held her. It was the way he let her be useful without question, without demand. No one had allowed her that since her husband's death, no one but him. But the world beyond the fence was not finished with them. One evening, when the last light bled over the hills, riders came. Their laughter reached before their shapes did, jagged and sharp against the quiet. She froze at the sound, her fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe. The rancher stepped out, his figure cutting strong against the horizon. 3 men halted in the snow-crusted yard, horses blowing mist. One she recognized faintly from town, a cattleman with eyes too narrow, a smile too thin. His voice carried mockery dressed as civility. "You've taken in a guest," he said, his glance sliding toward her like a knife. "Strange choice. Don't you worry what folks are saying." The rancher's hand rested near his belt, not on the rifle, not yet. His words came low. "Not my worry." The cattleman's laughter was ugly. "It should be. A man's reputation is worth more than his land. And you." His eyes found her again, lingering with cruelty. "You'd best move on before you cost him what little he has." Her stomach tightened, but she did not step back. The rancher's gaze never left the men. His voice was steady. "This is my land, my roof. My word says who stays." The air thickened. For a long moment no one moved. Then the cattleman spat into the snow and turned his horse. "You'll regret it," he muttered, riding off with the others, their laughter echoing like crows. That night the fire seemed smaller, the walls thinner. She sat with her hands clasped, her heart restless. He said little, only added wood to the fire and sat again, his jaw tight. But when she rose to clear the bowls, his hand touched hers, just lightly, a brush of reassurance. No words, only the weight of certainty passed between them. Days stretched in uneasy quiet. Gossip grew in town. Mrs. Carter, once polite, no longer visited. At the well, she felt eyes on her from the road. She told herself again she should go, spare him the cost of her presence. Yet every time she packed her shawl, the thought of the empty trail and the loneliness of night broke her resolve. It came to breaking one cold evening. The sound of hooves again, this time more than 3. Lanterns flickered through the dark, voices carried rough and mean. She ran to the door, fear knotting her chest. The rancher was already there, rifle in hand, coat thrown over his shoulders. The men halted in the yard, their shapes looming, breath clouding in the freezing air. The cattleman raised his voice. "We told you once. We won't tell you again. Send her out, or we'll do it for you." She felt her blood run cold. She wanted to speak, to tell them she would go, but the rancher's voice cut through the night. "She's not leaving." His words were simple, but they rang with iron. He leveled the rifle, not in threat, but in promise. The men shifted, their courage wavering in the weight of his stillness. Snow swirled between them, a veil that might break into violence with one wrong word. Finally the cattleman sneered. "This ain't finished." He wheeled his horse, the others following, their anger spilling into the dark. She turned to him, breath shaking. "They will come back." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Then I'll be ready." Sleep did not come easy that night. She lay awake, listening to the wind, the crack of the fire. In her chest, fear mingled with something else, something fierce and steady. No one had stood for her like that since her husband's death. No one had said, without question, that she belonged. The attack came days later, when the moon lay thin and pale. She woke to the scent of smoke, the glow of orange against the window. She ran to the door and saw it, the barn aflame, fire licking the sky, sparks scattering like stars torn loose. Her cry brought him running. He grabbed buckets, she followed, her hands trembling but strong. Together they hauled water, throwing it against the blaze, steam rising in clouds. The cattleman's work was plain, the fire too swift, too hungry. She coughed, her shawl pulling smoke into her lungs, but she kept running, kept carrying, her body moving with a will stronger than fear. The rancher tore at beams, pulling burning wood aside to keep the house safe. His face glowed red in the firelight, sweat and ash streaking his skin. At one moment the flames roared too close, and she thought he would vanish into them. She screamed his name, but he pushed through, dragging water with him, refusing to yield. The fire took the barn, but the house stood. When the last of the flames died, when the night sank heavy again, they stood side by side in the snow, their bodies shaking, smoke rising from their clothes. The barn was gone, a black skeleton against the stars. But the house, their shelter, remained. She turned to him, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Her voice broke. "They'll never stop. They'll keep coming." He looked at her then, his eyes clearer than she had ever seen them. "Let them come. You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever." The words were not loud, not dramatic. They were steady, the way earth is steady beneath one's feet. She felt them sink into her bones, stronger than any vow spoken in ceremony. For the first time since her husband's death, she believed she was not alone in the world. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it found his. His palm was rough, scarred, but warm. He did not pull away. He closed his fingers around hers, their silence louder than any promise. The stars glimmered faintly above, the snow falling soft as ash. The barn was gone, but something greater stood in its place, a bond forged not in firelight, but in the quiet after, when all was stripped bare and only truth remained. She thought of the first night she knocked on his door, her voice barely strong enough to ask for one night. Now she understood. That night had not been the end of her wandering. It had been the beginning of her home. And though the world would not stop its cruelty, though whispers and threats would rise again, she carried inside her the strength of that fire, the steadiness of his voice, the certainty of his hand in hers. In the silence that followed, she whispered, not to him but to the night itself, "One night became forever." And the narrator's voice, soft as snow falling on cedar, closed like a prayer. In the vast and merciless West, where storms erase all trace of the past, it is not the strongest rifle nor the hardest hand that saves us. It is the quiet choosing of care, the vow made not in words but in presence. One night's shelter, given freely, can become a lifetime of belonging.